You ever wonder what it feels like to watch your own life being stolen while you're still breathing? I'm not talking about someone taking your wallet or your car. I'm talking about someone reaching into your chest, ripping out your identity, your face, and your future, and then wearing them like a designer coat while you rot in the corner. My name was Elena. I say was because Elena died in a cheap neon flickering motel room in Van Nuys, clutching a bottle of pills and a heart that had been turned into jagged glass. But before that, I was the girl on every billboard in Times Square. I was the one the little girls in Kansas dreamed of being, and the person who destroyed me. She was the one who held my hair back when I was sick. She was my sister. Her name is Maya. Before you judge me for what I'm about to tell you, ask yourself one thing. If you were handed a second chance to take back everything that was ripped away from you, how far would you go? Would you be a saint, or would you be the monster they turned you into? If you're watching this from your bedroom or on your commute, or while you're hiding in the bathroom at a job you hate, just comment below and tell me where you are. I need to feel like I'm talking to real people, because for a long time I wasn't even sure I existed. Don't forget to hit subscribe because this story isn't just about a comeback. It's about a haunting. Maya and I met in an acting class when we were 19. I had the look, the blonde hair, the wide eyes, the natural ability to cry on cue. Maya had the drive. She was good, but she lacked that it factor, that glow that makes a camera fall in love. I didn't care. I loved her. I shared my apartment with her. I shared my clothes. And when I got my first big break in a teen drama, I shared my paycheck. I thought we were a team. I thought we were two girls against a world that wanted to chew us up. By the time I was 25, I was A-list. I had the Oscar buzz, the multi-million-dollar contracts, and a fiancé, Julian, who was a top-tier producer. Maya was always there 3 steps behind me, carrying my bag or fixing my makeup. People used to whisper that she was a leech, but I defended her. She's my best friend, I'd say. She's the only one who knew me before the fame. I was so blind it's almost pathetic. I didn't see the way she looked at my jewelry when I wasn't looking. I didn't see the way she practiced my signature in the back of her notebooks. The night of the premiere for The Glass Garden was supposed to be the pinnacle. It was the role that was going to define my career. I was nervous, sweating under the heavy lights of the vanity mirror in my dressing room. Maya was there as always. She told me I looked tired, that my skin looked stressed. She pulled out a small, unlabeled jar of white cream. "It's a Swiss organic mask, Elle." She whispered, her voice like honey. "It'll tighten everything up in 5 minutes. Trust me." I trusted her. I let her spread that cool, thick cream over my cheeks, my forehead, my chin. For the first 60 seconds it felt refreshing. Then it started to tingle. Then it started to itch. By the 3rd minute, my face felt like it was being pressed against a hot stove. I tried to wipe it off, but the pain was blinding. I screamed, reaching for the sink, but Maya wasn't helping. She was just standing there watching me through the mirror. She didn't look scared. She looked curious, like she was watching a science experiment. The doctors called it a chemical catastrophe. The cream had been spiked with a high-concentration industrial acid disguised by the thick base. My skin didn't just burn, it dissolved. My career ended that night. The headlines went from "Elena's Big Night" to "The Disfigured Star." The industry is a cruel place. They don't want a lead actress who looks like a horror movie prop. I spent a year in surgeries, hiding behind bandages, watching the world move on without me. And who moved into the vacuum I left behind? Maya. She used the tragedy of her best friend to get interviews. She cried on Ellen, talking about how hard it was to care for me. She humbly accepted the roles I had to drop out of to honor my legacy. Within 18 months, she was the new America's sweetheart. And Julian, my fiancé, the man who promised to love me forever, he couldn't handle the trauma of seeing my scars. He found comfort in Maya's arms. They were engaged before my final skin graft was even healed. I was left with nothing. No money, no face, no love. The night I read that Maya had signed a 3-picture deal with the studio that fired me, I realized the world didn't have room for two of us. I checked into a motel, wrote a note that no one would ever read, and swallowed everything in the cabinet. I remember the cold floor. I remember the smell of cheap bleach. I remember thinking, I hope she rots. Then everything went black. But it wasn't the peaceful black I expected. It was heavy, wet, and loud. There was a rhythmic thump, 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 thump that echoed everywhere. I felt like I was being squeezed through a straw. I tried to scream, but my lungs were filled with fluid. I was terrified. I thought I was in hell. Suddenly there was light, blinding surgical light. Cold air hit my skin, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I took a breath. But the sound that came out wasn't a woman's voice. It was the high-pitched, shrill wail of a newborn. I couldn't move my arms the way I wanted to. I couldn't open my eyes fully. I was trapped in a tiny, soft, useless body. I felt hands, large gloved hands, lifting me up. I was being cleaned, wrapped in something warm. My mind was screaming. I am Elena. I am 27 years old. What is happening? But all the world heard was a baby crying for its mother. She's beautiful, a voice said. That voice. I would know it if I were deaf. I would know it if I were dead. It was Maya. I forced my eyes open, struggling against the crust and the light. I saw her. She looked perfect. Her hair was blown out. Her makeup was flawless, even in a hospital bed. She looked like the goddess of success. She reached out and took me from the nurse. As she pulled me to her chest, I smelled it, the same perfume she wore the night she burned my life down. It was a scent of lilies and expensive lies. She looked down at me, and for a second our eyes locked. In that moment, the fog in my tiny brain cleared. I remembered everything. Every lie, every burn, every tear. I wasn't just a baby. I was the ghost she thought she'd buried. I was the living evidence of her sins, and she had just invited me into her home. She smiled, a soft maternal curve of the lips that would have fooled the world. Welcome home, little Lulu. She cooed, her breath warm against my forehead. You're going to give me everything I've ever wanted. I couldn't speak. I couldn't wrap my hands around her throat. But as I felt her heart beating against mine, a cold, steady calm settled over me. I looked at the woman who stole my life, and I didn't cry. I didn't blink. I just watched her. I watched the way her eyes darted to the camera her assistant was holding to capture the perfect birth photo for Instagram. I watched the way she adjusted my blanket just so the lighting hit her cheekbones better. I was back. I didn't know how and I didn't know why, but I was back. And as Maya pressed a fake staged kiss to my temple for the flashing cameras, I felt a surge of something more powerful than any drug I'd taken in that motel room. It wasn't love. It wasn't the bond they talk about in parenting books. It was the absolute, unwavering certainty that I was going to be the undoing of every single thing she had built. She thought she was holding her daughter. She didn't realize she was holding her executioner. I closed my tiny fists, catching a strand of her perfectly styled hair, and I pulled, feeling the first spark of a long, slow-burning fire. That golden strand of hair felt like a trophy between my tiny, uncoordinated fingers. Maya winced, a flicker of genuine irritation flashing across her face, before she quickly masked it with a performative pout for the cameras. She didn't realize that in that moment the power dynamic had already shifted. She saw a restless infant. I saw a woman whose entire empire was built on a foundation of ash and my stolen blood. Growing up as Lulu was a masterclass in psychological endurance. Imagine being a grown woman trapped in a world of pastel wallpapers, mashed peas, and the constant suffocating presence of your murderer. I had to learn to play the part. I had to babble when I wanted to curse. I had to crawl when I wanted to run. But most importantly, I had to watch. Maya's life was a carefully curated lie. To the world, she was the grieving best friend who found love and success against all odds. To me, she was a hollow shell who spent 3 hours a day editing her candid photos to hide the fine lines of stress around her eyes. She wasn't just my mother. She was my employer. By the time I was 3, I was the star of her Mommy and Me YouTube channel. She'd poke me to make me cry for emotional thumbnails or bribe me with sugar to act out scripted scenes of affection. "Smile for the fans, Lulu," she'd hiss between clenched teeth, her eyes cold while her mouth curled into a TV-ready grin. "Do you want that new doll or not?" I didn't want the doll. I wanted the camera to see what I saw, but I knew I had to wait. I started small planting seeds of unease in her mind. I was a prodigy, they said. I didn't just play with blocks. I arranged them into the floor plan of my old apartment, the one Maya and I shared before she ruined me. I'd draw pictures of a woman with a scarred face, calling her my invisible friend, Elena. The first time I said that name, Maya dropped her glass of Chardonnay. The red wine soaked into the white Moroccan rug like a fresh wound. Her face went pale, a ghostly gray that no amount of foundation could cover. The psychological toll on her was delicious. Maya started drinking more, her perfect facade cracking under the weight of her own guilt and my silent observations. She became paranoid, firing nannies every month because she thought they were feeding me stories. But the more she spiraled, the more the public loved the struggling, relatable mom persona. She was using me to stay relevant, but she didn't realize I was using those videos to study her every weakness. By age 5, my talent was undeniable. I could mimic anyone. I could evoke any emotion on command. While other kids were learning to tie their shoes, I was studying Stanislavski and Meissner in my head, refining the skills I had honed in my previous life. Maya saw a gold mine. She saw a way to extend her own fame through me. She began dragging me to every high-level audition in Hollywood, desperate to be the power player behind a child star. The turning point happened at a casting office on Sunset Boulevard. It was for the Crimson Ribbon, the kind of prestige drama that wins awards and launches icons. Maya had pushed for a supporting role for herself, using her influence to get us both into the room. When we stepped into that room, the air changed. The director didn't even look at Maya's headshot. He was staring at me. He saw something in my eyes that shouldn't exist in a 5-year-old, a depth of sorrow and a sharp, cynical intelligence. I let a single perfect tear track down my cheek, and I whispered a line that wasn't in the script, a line Julian used to say to me when we were happy. The room went dead silent. Maya froze her eyes, darting between me and the casting couch. She knew that line. She knew that look. For a split second, the mask slipped, and she looked at me with pure, unadulterated terror. She wasn't looking at her daughter. She was looking at the ghost of the woman she murdered, standing in a pair of sparkly sneakers. That night, back at the mansion, Maya stood in front of her vanity. I stood in the doorway, my shadow stretching long across the hardwood floor until it touched her feet. I didn't say a word. I just watched her through the mirror, letting my expression shift from a child's blankness to the cold, knowing smirk of the woman she thought she'd destroyed. That cold, knowing reflection in the vanity mirror haunted Maya long after I retreated into the shadows of the hallway. I could hear her glass clinking against the marble countertop, the frantic, rhythmic sound of a woman trying to drown a ghost that refused to stay buried. She thought she was losing her mind, but the reality was much worse. She was losing her grip on the only thing she ever truly loved, the spotlight. By the time I hit 16, the transition was complete. I wasn't just Lulu Maya's daughter anymore. I was the girl on the cover of Vogue, the one every director in town was fighting to cast. I had grown into a face that was a cruel irony of fate. My cheekbones, my eyes, the very way I tilted her head when I listened was a carbon copy of the Elena she had erased. Every time Maya looked at me, she saw her victim's ghost staring back with a teenager's youthful glow. It was a slow-acting poison, and I was the one holding the vial. The power shift didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened in our living room. Maya had been gunning for a comeback role, a gritty lead in a new noir series produced by Julian's studio. She spent weeks rehearsing her voice growing shrill as she tried to recapture a spark that had long since died. She looked desperate. She looked old. Julian. She'd plead over dinner, her hand trembling as she reached for his. This role is me. It's what I need to get back on top. Julian would look at her with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. He wasn't the shark-like producer I remembered. He was a man who had spent 16 years living with a woman's growing instability. He looked at me, and I gave him that soft, supportive smile I had perfected, the one that reminded him of the pure love he thought he had lost 2 decades ago. Maybe Lulu should read for the younger version of the character, Julian suggested one night, his eyes lingering on me just a second too long. Maya's fork hit her plate with a deafening clang. No, this is my project, Julian. She's too busy with her own stuff. But I wasn't too busy. I was hungry. A week later, I accidentally left my script for that very same project on the coffee table, covered in insightful, brilliant notes that Julian couldn't help but see. When he asked me to run lines with him, I didn't just read them, I inhabited them. I gave him a performance so raw, so reminiscent of the Elena he used to adore, that he forgot he was talking to his daughter. "You're her," he whispered, his eyes wide. "You have that same fire." I didn't steal the role from Maya. I let the industry take it from her. When the studio officially offered me the lead, not the younger version, but the lead, and moved Maya to a minor supporting role as the mother, the scream that tore out of her throat echoed through the entire mansion. She threw her awards at the wall, the gold plating chipping off just like her sanity. I didn't stop at her career. I started coming for her home life, the perfect family she had built on my ruins. I became Julian's confidant. I'd sit with him in his study late at night, listening to him complain about Maya's drinking, her erratic behavior, her obsession with someone named Elena. I'd nod sympathetically, planting the smallest, most toxic seeds of doubt. Mom hasn't been herself since I started getting more work. I'd say, my voice a delicate thread of fake concern. I think she's jealous of me, Dad. It scares me. The man who had once been my fiancé, who had stood by while I was disfigured, was now being played like a cheap violin by the daughter he thought he knew. He began to see Maya as the villain in our story. He moved into the guest room. He stopped looking at her. Every bit of affection he once gave her, he redirected toward me, the prodigy, who brought light back into his gray life. The air in our house became thick with attention you could cut with a knife. Maya was a cornered animal. She stopped eating. She'd wander the halls at 3 a.m. clutching a bottle of pills, whispering to the walls. She knew I was doing it. She knew the prodigy was a parasite, but she couldn't prove it without sounding insane. One evening, I found her in my bedroom. She had torn apart my closet looking for something, anything to use against me. She was holding a photo of the original Elena I had found in an old archive. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair a matted mess. "You think you're so smart?" she hissed, her fingernails digging into the photograph. "You think you can just take it all back? I made you. I gave you this life." I walked toward her, slow and steady, until I was just inches from her face. I didn't look like a scared teenager. I looked like a predator. I leaned in close, my breath brushing against her ear, and for the first time in 16 years I let my true voice out, the low, melodic tone of the woman she thought she had burned to death. "You didn't give me this life, Maya." I whispered the words cold enough to freeze the blood in her veins. "You just held on to it for me while I was gone, and now I want my interest paid in full." Maya's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes bulging as she scrambled backward, tripping over a pile of my designer shoes. She stared at me, her chest heaving as the realization finally truly sank in. The monster wasn't in her head. It was standing right in front of her, wearing her own DNA. She reached out for the heavy brass lamp on my nightstand, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the base, her face twisting into a mask of pure murderous desperation. The heavy brass lamp shook in Maya's grip, a pathetic weapon against a ghost that had already taken up residence in her own home. She looked like a cornered rat, graying hair, wild eyes, and a soul that was finally visibly rotting from the inside out. I didn't flinch. I didn't even raise my hand to defend myself. I just stood there, letting the silence of my bedroom wrap around her like a shroud. I wanted her to feel the crushing weight of her own choices the way I felt the weight of that acid 20 years ago. "Do it, Maya," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "Finish what you started in that dressing room. But remember, this time, the whole world is watching." I tilted my head toward the corner of my vanity. A small green light was blinking. My phone was propped up, live streaming to my 5 million followers. The Prodigy Lulu brand was built on transparency, and I had just accidentally started a broadcast titled Late Night Venting. The comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur of "OMG, is she okay?" and "call the police." Maya's eyes darted to the screen, then back to me. The realization that she was being unmasked in real time broke the last string of her sanity. She didn't swing the lamp. She dropped it. The heavy thud on the hardwood floor sounded like a gavel coming down. She fell to her knees, sobbing, not the beautiful cinematic sobs she used to fake for the cameras, but a raw, ugly wail of a woman who knew she had lost everything. Within an hour, the perfect mom narrative was incinerated. The clip of her lunging at me, the audio of her screaming about taking back a life, and her admitted obsession with a dead woman went viral. By morning, Julian had filed for an emergency restraining order. By noon, her talent agency had scrubbed her name from their website. The world didn't just cancel her. They erased her exactly the way she had erased Elena. A month later, I stood in the foyer of the estate I had just bought back with my own earnings. It was the same house Elena had dreamed of owning before the accident. Maya was gone, tucked away in a high-security psychiatric facility, where she spent her days talking to walls about the girl with the stolen skin. Julian was a ghost of a man living in a hotel, too ashamed to look at the daughter who reminded him so much of the woman he had betrayed. I walked through the empty rooms, the heels of my boots clicking against the marble. I had the fame. I had the money. I had the justice. I stood on the balcony looking out over the Hollywood Hills as the sun began to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. I should have felt like a queen. I should have felt the rush of a grand finale. But as I caught my reflection in the glass door, I saw a girl who looked like Elena, but felt like nothing. I had spent 16 years being a weapon, a mirror, a shadow. I had won the war, but in the process I had forgotten how to just be. I realized then that revenge is a hungry fire. It doesn't just burn your enemies, it consumes the air you need to breathe. I sat down on the edge of the fountain in the garden, the water splashing softly behind me. I pulled out my phone one last time, looking at the subscribe button on my own channel. The numbers were higher than ever, but they were just digital ghosts. Was it worth it? I whispered to the empty air. There was no answer. Only the distant sound of a siren and the cold realization that while I had reclaimed my throne, I was sitting on it alone, wearing the face of a dead woman in a world that only loved me for the drama. I had survived the fire, but I was still waiting for the smoke to clear, so I could finally find out who Lulu really was, if there was anything left of her at all. I reached out and touched the stone rim of the fountain, feeling the cold moss beneath my fingertips, wondering if this was the victory I had died for, or just a different kind of prison.